Hello, I'm Stephen, and you are watching The World According to Stephen. This time on How They Got It Wrong. Physical attacks on undead creatures. Today we'll be talking about the mechanics of physical attacks and invulnerability in mostly fantasy and supernatural horror genres. This has to do with the idea that in some sort of fantasy or supernatural horror setting, various types of supernatural or magical beings or creatures are resistant or immune to conventional physical damage and things like that. But there are problems sometimes with the way this is actually shown in terms of what actually physically happens. One of the most basic problems often seen with depictions of supposed immunity or invulnerability of supernatural or undead creatures is the postulation that only a certain type of attack or damage will actually hurt or kill a creature, without clearly showing or mentioning either an actual complete physical immunity, at least very least to that sort of other sorts of attacks or damage, or some kind of regeneration. In other words, if your vampires can only be killed in a certain way, then other stabs, cuts, or gunshot hits should either not damage their bodies, or the affected area should be shown or mentioned as regenerating, or having regenerated in the interim later on. Otherwise, if the creature only truly and permanently dies from a certain method, say cutting off the head with a special sword, then other effective and damaging attacks on its physical body could still be quite inconvenient, at least. Also, if the creature's supernatural immortality does not regenerate physical damage, at a certain point the question becomes, how does the creature survive if the entire physical body is destroyed by some combination of fire, explosion, and deliberate scattering of the ashes? Which is fine if you establish that in addition to a preferred, more effective method or methods, because, certain magic or holy whatever works better, complete physical destruction does also work. But if you don't, then it doesn't really make sense, and it's worse if you claim your creatures can only be killed a certain way, but then show or tell them being damaged in other ways without any later regeneration. If it's simply not made clear, as is often the case, it can seem like unnatural stupidity is being enforced on the human characters, right? The ones trying to fight this supernatural evil or whatever it is, zombie horde, if they don't at least attempt to exploit this loophole, as they usually don't. This is actually played with, and sometimes played for laughs, in certain self-aware works, such as the Dresden Files. The Black Court vampires in this series can only be truly killed by some combination of massive physical trauma, so complete destruction of the body, check, and or certain magical effects and energies they are specifically vulnerable to. However, they are shown being rather impaired or slowed down by other physical trauma, and it doesn't automatically regenerate, or at least not quickly for the weaker ones. Any such regeneration seems dependent on the vampire's age and power. While not part of the fantasy or supernatural genres by intention or sort of general classification, a certain Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie has this issue as well. An assassin character is described as having no ability to feel physical pain due to a weird brain injury. This supposedly makes him much physically tougher and harder to kill. Yeah, sorry, this is nonsense. You don't feel pain just to be an inconvenience. You feel pain to tell you when something is wrong. Gunshots, sword cuts, and knife stabs don't generally kill people with pain. They kill with physical trauma that results in loss of blood and or other issues like organ failure. Although extreme pain can also be part of the causes of heart attack, stroke, or cardiac arrest induced by trauma. Also, even a shot, cut, or blunt impact that doesn't cause immediate or imminent death might break one or more bones, damage important muscles and or tendons and ligaments, damage crucial organs, thus lessening their function, or cause brain damage. Lowered blood pressure and volume decreases one's ability to move around and continue fighting. While it is the most obvious example, that particular James Bond movie is not the only fictional example, sadly, in which physical wounds are portrayed as killing via unendurable pain and not much of a problem otherwise. And again, overall, as above, it's a nonsense notion. This and a certain unfortunate ignorance, generally, of the effectiveness of massive explosions, particularly thermobaric ones, and large high-velocity shell fragments, as well as of sustained heavy machine gun fire at destroying and removing heads, is one of the major problems of World War Z. The supposed ineffectiveness of high-tech modern weaponry against zombie hordes, in fact, makes no sense. Even if the head has to be removed or destroyed to outright kill the creature, massive physical trauma to the rest of the body would rather impair its ability to chase down and harm anyone, and make it more of an obstacle for other such creatures coming along behind it. And without food of some kind, to actually replace, energy, or outright magic, such damage should not heal on its own. And if it doesn't at a certain point, what threat is the creature? A 155mm howitzer also is not a particularly precise weapon, nor are its shells somehow magically more effective at damaging the torso than the head. The modern U.S. high explosive fragmentation shell for such a howitzer has a officially listed lethal radius of 50 meters for normal humans. Okay, while older bolt-action and semi-automatic rifles often do use heavier cartridges than modern assault rifles, some early assault rifles did use more powerful cartridges, but of course at the cost of controllability issues when fired on full automatic. One gentleman I used to know who was trained on such a weapon when inducted into the U.S. Army said they were instructed to fire at one of the feet of the enemy with the idea that the burst was going to end at his head, which there's a little bit of a pull to one side and quite a bit of climb involved. Now, some of these rifles are still in service despite the overall wide introduction of lighter assault rifle cartridges such as 5.56mm NATO and 5.45mm Russian. Some of these older 7.62mm or 30 caliber battle rifles are undoubtedly select fire models that could be used on semi-automatic for better aiming at zombie heads. Also, the M4 and M16A2, for instance, chambered in that 5.56 NATO, actually have had full auto replaced with a 3-round burst selector setting, because the third round leaves the barrel before the recoil from the first round can have any effect on the aim. Thus, a soldier, so equipped, could with that setting pump 3 5.56 rounds, each of them with an initial energy of 2,000 joules, thus 6,000 joules, total, into the head of a zombie, while during about the same amount of time his comrade firing semi-auto with an older rifle would hit a zombie's head with only one 7.62mm times 51mm NATO round with an initial energy of 3,000 joules. There would be absolutely no reason to use bolt-action rifles in place of semi-automatics, as they tended to fire the same cartridges, and the bolt-action weapons are slower and more involved to cycle, which increases the danger to the user if something dangerous is, charging at him. Brooks also seems to ignore that unlike, say, the Ingram MAC-10 submachine gun, described by former LAPD Chief Daryl Gates as suitable only for a fight in a phone booth, some other automatic weapons are considerably more accurate. This is particularly true for light machine guns when fired with the bipod used, and the shooter braced, and even more so for crew-served medium and heavy machine guns fired from a tripod. With the latter, In addition to the stability provided by the tripod, often with military ammunition in the field, every fifth or sixth round or so is a tracer, allowing one to see where one is shooting and walk fire into the enemy, especially at night. Machine gun crews could be retrained to walk fire into zombie heads and necks this way. Particularly when there is a large horde of them advancing, a crew set up at a comparable but perhaps slightly higher altitude to account for bullet drop over distance could slew the weapon back and forth at head and or neck level in a long burst. And again, if they're slightly off, you can walk the fire into the right level. It would be World War I trench warfare, but with even stupider enemies, lacking rifles or artillery support or poison gas or anything like that of their own. And it should be highly effective. If Brooks wanted to do World War I or before with zombies, okay, set it in the right period. Don't come up with dumb reasons to claim people have to use bolt-action rifles when they could use machine guns, and they, for some magic reason, don't. So I hope you enjoyed watching and me tell you how they got it wrong with physical damage to undead and similar creatures, and some bonus material about physical damage without pain to humans. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought.